Number 1. After graduating from high school, back in the 80s, sweethearts Donna and Frank decided to move in together and bought an old farmhouse near the rural village of Palermo. The immediate area has been absorbed into the town of Oakville and has been extensively developed since then, but it was an isolated backwater back when the young lovers took possession of the property. Frank had a background in construction, and Donna liked painting and wallpapering, so the plan was to fix the place up using sweat equity. But Frank often had to travel to work on projects in other towns, leaving Donna alone for weeks on end. She didn't mind it too much, at first, but after a while, she began to dread the fall of darkness. All old houses are filled with strange sounds at night, but Donna felt there was something more sinister than the usual creaking and settling going on. For one thing, she kept hearing whispering voices, both male and female, but they stopped whenever she tried to listen. She could never make out any words, just a low sibilant humming, but she was sure. And then Donna had the feeling of being watched all the time, but especially when she was in bed. She took to keeping the drapes shut and contemplated going to stay with her parents till Frank got home. But one hot August night, Donna was so tired, she left her bedroom curtains open. She woke up with a start. She didn't know what time it was or why she had awakened. Bright moonlight was streaming in through the window, which was wide open to let in some fresh air. At first she thought she'd been roused by the moonbeams, until she heard the laughter. 2 heads, one male, one female, were framed in the opening, floating a foot above the sill. Donna couldn't make out their features, but both had longish hair and red glowing eyes. They had stopped laughing. Then the female said, "Donna, Donna." The next thing Donna knew, she was locked in the hall closet, cowering on the floor, and as she huddled there, she could hear both voices calling, "Donna, Donna." Something banged on the door, then banged again, over and over, and Donna thought they must be pounding it with their faces, since they had no hands, and she had to cover her mouth to keep from laughing hysterically, and to keep from screaming, as they kept banging and calling, banging and calling, banging and calling, banging. Eventually they stopped. Eventually she fell asleep, and in the morning she went to stay with her parents. Donna's dad had an old friend who was an amateur historian, and when he heard about the incident, told her it was the night floaters. "That old house of yours isn't very far from the valley of the 16, Lions Valley Park, eh? Well, down in the valley, there was this village, Proudfoot's Hollow, which was a nest of night floaters. The night floaters were probably the reason the village was eventually abandoned." Donna's parents had never mentioned the night floaters, not even to deny their existence, so she had no idea what they were. The night floaters, the historian said, are beings that are able to detach their heads from the trunks of their bodies, the heads then being able to fly or float at will. They fly through the night to feed on the blood, the flesh, and the sanity of potential victims. Due to your proximity, you and Frank have attracted their attention, which is never a good thing, I know. Donna and Frank moved to an apartment in town. But the abandoned house is there to this day, moldering away. Visit if you dare. Number 2. Kirby was a geography student at Niagara University. One summer, he got a gig as part of a crew conducting a tree inventory for the section of the Niagara Escarpment near the campus. The other members of the team lived in town, but since he was from out of province, Kirby lived in the university residence. The good news was he lived there rent-free as part of his pay. The bad news was that he lived there alone. Totally alone. Not another single student or person in the entire place. At first it creeped him out, but once he got used to it, he found he rather liked it. He could turn up the big TV in the student lounge as loud as he liked, crank heavy metal at 3 in the morning, and pass out on a sofa or anywhere he cared to lie down. Not that he spent much time in the res. After work, he would go out for beers with the crew, and occasionally he would find someplace else to spend the night. But one long weekend, when the dog days began to howl, Kirby suddenly found himself alone. Everyone had plans and were gone for the weekend. Friday was a strange day. They were short-handed, so Kirby had to work by himself, covering a section of woods just below the university campus. The job wasn't as much fun when you were on your own, so he immersed himself in the task at hand to make the time pass more quickly. Suddenly he realized everything had gone quiet. Too quiet. He was working in a wooded area, not far from both the university campus and a busy road. Normally you would hear birds and insects, critters moving through the underbrush, cars passing in the distance. But now there was only silence. Not even the sound of the wind. Nothing. Kirby flinched, thinking he had heard someone call his name, maybe a colleague or a student he knew. But when he looked around, there was no one to be seen. Only the deathly silence. He thought he saw something white flicker through the trees, but when he looked closely, whatever it was gone. Had it been a bird or what? Feeling very uncomfortable, he decided to take a break and walked up the ridge to the main campus, where he headed to the cafeteria, where he found both people and noise. When he returned to work, he spotted a woodchuck waddling through the trees and heard bird song, so he knew everything had returned to normal. He completed his tasks without incident. Friday night, Kirby ended up making the rounds alone and didn't run into anyone he knew, so he decided to walk home early. The road to the campus ran up the side of the escarpment. Kirby didn't encounter any other pedestrians and damn few cars. In fact, the woods along the road seemed quiet, too damn quiet, just like earlier in the afternoon. Kirby stopped dead for a moment and listened, but there was nothing. He was about to continue on when he heard a voice call, "Kirby!" But there wasn't a soul in sight. Kirby sensed movement in the dark underbrush, but he couldn't be sure it wasn't his imagination. "Hello?" he sang and waited. But nothing. But when he started moving, it happened again. "Kirby!" Again he looked around. Again he saw nothing. So he picked up the pace and was soon back at the residence. He cracked a cold one and turned on the TV in the big lounge, grabbed the remote, and began a pleasurable round of mindless channel surfing. He ended up on one of the sports channels and was slowly falling asleep. "Kirby!" And instantly he was wide awake. He wasn't sure if he had been dreaming or not, and sat there for a moment to see if the voice would come again. He muted the sound and waited. Heard nothing, and then it came. "Kirby!" He began walking through the lounge and found nothing and no one. "I must be hearing things," he told himself, and decided a fresh beer might be in order. So he headed to the fridge and was just opening the happy door when, "Kirby! Kirby! We see you, Kirby!" In seconds, he locked himself in his room and sat on the bed, and he closed the curtains, and he didn't dare turn on the lights. The voices came then, several of them, male and female, calling, "Kirby! Kirby! We know you're in there. Come out, man! Come out and play!" Kirby stole a quick look through a crack in the drapes. It was bright moonlight, and he could clearly see 3 human heads, a male and 2 females, hovering just outside his window. He wasn't able to see the faces clearly, but they had a certain likeness. Thin, pale, with acne or blemishes, long unkempt dark hair, and red glowing eyes. And they were taunting him. "Kirby! We know you're in there, Kirby! What's the matter, pussy?" Strangely, Kirby found himself drawn. Found he really wanted to go outside to join them, be with them, but he knew instinctively that if he did, it would mean death. So he cranked Metallica to drown them out, and eventually he fell asleep. The next day he took off to visit a friend in the GTA and spent the rest of the summer couch surfing. Kirby didn't know why he was targeted, didn't even know what the heads were, until someone told him about the night floaters. But he never worked alone again, and he still avoids the woods as much as possible. If this is your first visit to my channel, my name is Warren, and I write and tell original ghost stories and original horror stories featuring cryptids such as the night floaters, werewolves, and black-eyed children. I hope you will consider subscribing. Till midnight. Cheers.